So thanks very much for having me, Sharon and Jackie. I'm here because, as Jackie's just said, there's one particular thing I do, and have been doing in this fantastic industry of ours for, as Jackie kindly said, 30 years now. What I do, fundamentally, is very simple. I write down odd thoughts and odd poems, and I draw what you might generously describe as very simple pictures. But that's not to say that I undervalue what I do, because in fact, the oddness and the simplicity are, I think, very much a part of the success of how I design, which I'll try to explain about in a minute. But first, because I'm English, I'd like to start naturally by apologising. I find myself in the uncomfortable position of being here because I've made my small mark on the industry, and I've been invited to shed some light on what I think the reasons behind this may be. Now, clearly, there's an inevitable and absolutely mortifying risk of sounding immodest. So please understand that all I'm going to try to do now is just be as candid and hopefully as analytical as possible, just in case it's of any use to anyone at all in this room. So how did I start? With him. First of all, just right back at the beginning, I'd always loved nonsense poetry at school. I was a bit sort of nerdy like that. But fast forward to the mid-80s, and alternative comedy, you may remember, was in full swing then, reaching its zenith, in my view, with Rick Mail and the Young Ones. And those of you who are as ancient as me may remember that, as well as being a self-styled right-on anarchist, Rick was also something of a people's poet. And as a then 18-year-old, I was completely beguiled by the fact that Rick's poetry was so bad, yet somehow the character behind it was so enthusiastic and confident. And I found that mismatch between his art and his view of his art so funny and unusual and original that a thought began to brew in my little head too. I was at uni a short while later, and together with a bunch of friends, we put on a review show with comedy sketches and music and magic, and me as a newly fledged performance poet, dressed in a beret, flowery shirt, and putting on an appropriately camp poetry voice. I took on the stage name Purple Ronnie just because it sort of sounded appropriately odd and random. Now, my mother was one of those fantastic women who we all in this room adore, and mercifully there are still a few of them around, the kind that goes shopping for the family dinner and accidentally comes home with 28 greetings cards and no idea yet who on earth they're going to be for. And she'd stuff her desk to bursting with all these cards, and she would really just often get them out and read them to us. Sundays in the Andreae family were a blast. The point is that I grew up, very fortunately, with a culture of greetings cards actually being a venerated and valuable medium of creative expression. And it wasn't long before I began to wonder about putting my performance poetry onto cards. So I chose a few poems, got a friend to do some very basic illustrations, and we took them to the print shop at the end of my street and placed an order for, I think it was 50 copies of 8 designs. They were postcards because no one had yet told us that you could get twice as much money if you folded them in half. And they were black and white simply because it was cheaper to print than colour. That's absolutely true. And we took these cards round the shops in Oxford and sold them for 10p each with a minimum order of 1. That's 1 card, not 1 dozen cards, literally 1 card. And we managed to open 8 accounts, as I discovered they were called. And we were in business enough to buy about 2 kebabs each a week. Heady days, my friends. Just to give you some context, I've got a slide here, I haven't seen these for ages, of 2 of the very first Purple Ronnie cards from 1987. Really different to what you might understand of Purple Ronnie now. I know. They didn't even rhyme. I then started to think that we should try to get our designs in front of some more grown-up publishers. You couldn't really be less grown-up than this operation. But unsurprisingly, given what you're looking at, we received nothing but rejection letters. Lots and lots and lots of rejection letters. But then, a chance introduction a few months later by a friend's parents to their new greetings card publishing neighbour, not many of them around, found me sitting at my first publisher's lunch. And our industry being what it is, and God bless it for that, it took place at Green Tables, which is the cafe at the back of Asda on the Park Royal Industrial Estate in North London. And it was curry and chips, twice, £2.95. I did land a more proper publishing deal from Statics, run by Chris Douglas Morris, who subsequently became a very dear friend. What he didn't know was that he was probably the only card publisher in the country who hadn't turned Purple Ronnie down in the last year. And what I certainly didn't know, which he later confessed to me, was that one of the main reasons why he took it on was because he bought a job lot of paper for a high-end art range that he was doing, which turned out to be crap. The paper, not the art range. And he needed to get rid of it on something that really didn't matter. So he thought these weird handwritten poems with basic scribbly drawings would solve that problem perfectly, and that's absolutely true. I've got a couple of slides to show you what Purple Ronnie first looked like when Chris took it on. Now I've picked these two designs because I think they illustrate the reasons why Purple Ronnie did eventually become a bit of a thing, and why I think greetings cards, and particularly the way that we use them here in the UK, are so magic. So a few points. First of all, there's the sort of just incredible amateurish look of them. There's something about the fact that they look so basic that I think actually made people warm to them emotionally. I'm not sure, I may be wrong, but I don't think there'd been anything that looked quite as homemade as this before in greetings cards. And I do think that was part of their appeal, their charm perhaps. Secondly, I suspect there was something new here in the way that greetings cards were actually being used, because these were alternative comedy really, but just not on TV or on the stage. And in fact, I suspect that Purple Ronnie, when it first came out on cards, was used much more to decorate student bedrooms than to send in the post to say happy birthday, get well, the usual sentiments that we're all obviously painfully aware of. Then there's the voice, and I think this is really important, but very important to the success of Purple Ronnie, I feel, is that there is a voice, a personality behind the poems and the drawings that unites them, rather than them simply being a sort of bunch of birthday cards that all look roughly the same. Then there's the tone. Purple Ronnie, completely by accident, because I'd not done anything like this before, had one foot in those two, what I now know to be major categories of cute and humour. So on the one hand, there's the naughty, cheeky, schoolboy humour, if you like, of bottom burps. Doesn't it sound good in my posh English? Bottom burps. And on the other, there's the tender, really quite sentimental tone of to someone I like. And as a greetings card send, this turned out to be quite a potent cocktail, and in particular, I think, for us Brits. I think people found the mix of soppiness but cut with humour to be a very effective way to say really quite sentimental things to their loved ones without being overly cloying or cheesy or naff. There is a final ingredient here which, if anything, I think in hindsight, and totally accidentally on my part, is probably the X factor of greetings cards. But I'll come to that in a minute. So as Purple Ronnie began to catch on, I started to think that if it worked on cards, it might have a small chance of working on other products too. And with the toilet humour that you're familiar with, the most obvious category seemed to me to be toiletries. And now the licensing industry at the time was almost solely about the big entertainment brands. There were a few exceptions. But eventually I managed to persuade a company called Grosvenor, who were the largest licensed toiletries company, to launch a range of Purple Ronnie men's toiletries, the standout item of which turned out to be Willy Wash. Now, because this was sort of pre-digital, you can't really see, this is the best slide I have, but Willy Wash is there in the middle. We've got Tasty Todger, Tickly Balls, still quite babyish even though I'm 50. Willy Wash, the poem says, when people get out your wobbler, they don't always know where it's been. But if you use this in the shower, it always looks lovely and clean. Well, we sold tons of it. In big bottles, small bottles, one-shot travel sizes. Quite what people have been making do with before then, I have no idea. Anyway, of course, the success of this one product led to a lot more licensing and a very busy few years in the early noughties, I think we call them, including advertising for a long time, 7 or 8 years, for soft drink Vimto, which was voiced by Martin Clunes and then Matt Lucas. And we even did condoms. There was a company, I'm not sure if it still exists, it probably does, called Condomania, who actually manufactured purple rondoms. However, the fact that Purple Ronnie had become much more mass market actually became rather restrictive creatively, not least because the cards were now being published by Hallmark, who taste-wise, quite understandably, tended to err on the fairly conservative. This is what Purple Ronnie looked like in the Hallmark years, by the way, really quite a difference now. I think people were using computers a bit here as well. There was also the added issue that when we were trying to persuade Hallmark to publish Purple Ronnie in the States, they were genuinely horrified that this stick man wasn't wearing any pants. True. So we literally had to draw trousers onto every single illustration destined for Kansas City. So at this point in 2002, and a couple of years before I then sold ownership of Purple Ronnie to the IP company Coolabye, I started doing something completely new in order to try to recapture what had worked about Purple Ronnie right at the beginning, and that was what became Edward Monkton. Sorry, Sharon is well aware that this is my first ever PowerPoint show, so I'm sorry for this slightly dodgy slides. So David Hicks took Edward Monkton on really good. He told me at the time actually that he was thinking of downsizing his company, and this might be exactly the kind of brand that would help him do that. He did tell me that. Just a quick story behind the name, because I know people ask. You may have heard that if you were to be a porn star, the best formula for your porn name is often the name of your first pet, combined with your mother's maiden name. Mine actually is Honey Escort, wrong sex, but brilliant porn name. And if you were to be a writer, the formula for that is your middle name, combined with the name of the place where you live, your street, village, town. And that did genuinely give me Edward Monkton, which just sounded absolutely right for the kind of work that I was creating. Now, although the tone of Edward Monkton is very different to Purple Ronnie, the tools are actually quite simple. Odd thoughts, very simple, naive drawings, which this time I did myself simply because I couldn't find anyone else who could draw in quite such a, I don't want to do a Ratner, but that's a bad way. I referred a little while ago to the notion of an X factor of greetings card design. And this is really a personal, creative thing, not a commercial thing. So I'll try to explain just a little bit about what I mean. There are certain books, works of art, poems, pieces of music that can really find their way very deep into my soul, and it's the same, I know, for all of us. And their capacity to do that is usually completely unrelated to the level of technical skill that's gone into them. So if you take, for me, in my instance, a Leonard Cohen or a Bob Dylan or a Johnny Cash song, the guitar playing is rudimentary. The singing wouldn't get them into any choir in the world. The chord structures and melodies are often very basic, but how they can make you feel is absolutely sublime. It's nothing to do with polish, it's nothing to do with production, or indeed commercial resource. And in fact, polish and production and resource can actually compromise and mask what they're actually fundamentally really doing. And what they have is an ability to get inside you and make you feel things with them at a very authentic and very human level. Now, in greetings cards, I don't think we can ever make people feel things quite to that level, but we can go a small way towards it, because as we know, if there's one thing that greetings cards are all about, it is, of course, making a connection. Now, we can do this by bonding over a shared sense of humour, a shared visual aesthetic, or by simply finding some powerful words that really resonate between two people. And how incredible that we emotionally repressed Brits are actually best at doing this in the world. And in fact, maybe it's because we're British that greetings cards, these little parcels of emotion, are so incredibly useful for us. They're one safe little step removed from pouring it all out directly, face to face, like perhaps our American cousins might do. So when I try to crystallise what this X factor of creativity might be, the word that I always seem to stumble for is charm. It's a characteristic for me that reaches right through creative work back to the personality behind it. So for me, a really successful piece of work, whether it's a song, a book, a movie, or of course a card, is one that actually makes me look beyond the creative piece itself and think, wow, who wrote that? Who designed that? I know we'd get on. In fact, I know we'd be very best friends and probably have babies together and live happily ever after forever and ever and ever. Now, I'm well aware that's exactly the kind of delusion that stalkers labour under and that causes a lot of problems for the police, but it is just simply how I feel. To link this back to why I'm talking to you, people have been kind enough to let me know from time to time that Edward Monkton can, at its best, have something that reaches quite deeply into them, and that makes this fundamental human connection, and that tries to express and to share the delicate and beautiful and funny and ridiculous and joyful experience that is just simply being human together. In fact, thanks largely, I think, to the power of the internet, the Edward Monkton book, A Lovely Love Story, a very sort of condensed version of which you can see here as a print, has in recent years become one of the most popular readings at wedding ceremonies, making a connection with a stranger is, I find, about the most human and about the most rewarding thing that we can do. And in this room, we all do it every day. It's quite a job. I suppose I should just complete my story by telling you a little bit about my most recent project, which is Happy Jackson. This slide is kind of messed up, as my kids would say. The one thing you can't see is the most important thing, which is the brand name. It looks quite cool on black though. Happy Jackson, the name, by the way, because Jackson is the name of my youngest son, and Happy Jackson is literally the first internet password that he chose for himself when he was 5. Who can argue with a kid that does that? So you may know that Happy Jackson is a collaboration with my former art director at Hallmark, art director / designer Heather Flynn, and it's published by the lovely people at Pigment. And this was really, finally, after, God knows, 20 years or something, an attempt to make things easier for myself, in that my other ranges had started off very weird, black and white, quite masculine, hand-drawn, left field. So I thought, finally, what if I did something that's actually not weird, that's not very hard to understand, that's shiny, that's colourful, never really used colour properly before, that's upbeat, that's fun, that's got a sort of fashion element to it, and maybe that's a bit more girly. I know it's a wash bag, but you get the point. The weird thing is, it turns out that girls buy a lot more stuff than boys. Who knew? It did take me 30 years to discover that, actually, but then I'm a really slow learner. I was genuinely 6 years into writing Purple Ronnie before I realised that the magic words happy birthday put together were quite an effective way of selling folded pieces of paper. And although Happy Jackson is undoubtedly a more mainstream and more commercial looking brand than Ronnie or Monkton, we are very careful to make sure that it has enough character, enough depth and quirk to it to give it substance. Now I've got a couple of slides here, my favourite ones that go a bit weird, but I'm not sure you can really read them. Friends forever, don't want to freak you out or anything, but technically that means until one of us dies. Yes, that's right, dies. Very jolly greetings card. Oh crap, I forgot your birthday, but you know, you'll get over it. And if you don't, well, what does that say about you, yeah? I'm not sure it sounds very well. Safe part for a man. Happy birthday, nice man from me. Short, to the point, not too much emotional fuss. Says it all, really. And then we got the happy trousers. So what we try to do with Happy Jackson, as much as with any of my other writing and design work, is to radiate just some of that character, that charm, if you like, that I think is crucial in really making an authentic, and personal, meaningful, and human connection with our audience, which is what our industry, at its best, is just so incredibly good at. And that's me. Thank you.